She didn't have a name tag. She didn't have a seat at the table. But with just one whispered sentence, she made the CEO of Manhattan's biggest finance firm rise from his chair. It started the way most quiet things do, with the hum of fluorescent lights and the soft squeak of a mop. Claire Bennett always began her shift at 9:45 p.m. sharp. The 47th floor of Madison One Tower, right off Wall Street, was the last to be cleaned, and the first to forget people like her ever existed. She moved silently, like a shadow in Janitor's Blues, her neon yellow ID badge flipped blank side out. She liked it that way. Nobody asked questions. Nobody wondered if she'd once been the top of her class in financial modeling, or that she still read SEC filings the way others skimmed tabloids. That was part of the piece. Invisibility. But that night, invisibility failed her. Behind the thick glass of the executive boardroom, lights still burned. It was nearly midnight, but inside sat 7 men and 1 woman, their voices sharp, their sleeves rolled. A half-dozen laptops glowed across the table, reflecting off polished marble. Claire wasn't supposed to be on that side of the floor yet. But the Keurig machine just outside the boardroom had overflowed again, and her supervisor hated stains. She crouched, started scrubbing, and that's when she heard it. If we move fast, we can absorb a controlling stake in Braytel Systems before Q4, use their remaining patents as leverage, dump the rest. Braytel. She blinked. God, they're serious. Claire stayed completely still. Her sponge, now soaked in coffee, hung in her hand. Braytel Systems, the failing Palo Alto tech firm, had been on her radar for weeks. She tracked them out of habit. Some people liked crossword puzzles. She liked chasing financial smoke. And this plan? This was a firestorm waiting to happen. They didn't know, or didn't care. She heard someone else chime in. Their market cap's been bleeding out for months. This could be our chance to scoop up their AI division before Goldman even notices. Claire's jaw tightened. That division was stripped and sold to a shadow firm back in March. It wasn't public, but if you connected the filings, it was obvious. Braytel didn't have patents anymore. They had lawsuits waiting to happen. She stood up slowly, pushing her mop cart further down the hall to avoid suspicion. But her ears stayed sharp. Inside the boardroom, tension brewed. One younger man, probably early 30s, raised a concern. There's no public roadmap on their tech anymore. What if they've already offloaded the core IP? The CEO, a silver-haired, tall man with a crisp voice, waved the question off. We're not here for due diligence. We're here for the position. We bluff our value through Q1, ride the share spike, then dump. Claire wanted to scream. This wasn't risk. It was fraud in a suit. But she said nothing. Not then. That's how she'd trained herself. After the hospital bills, the foreclosure, after dropping out of Wharton halfway through her 2nd year. Silence was cheaper than being right. At 4:32 a.m., she got off the Q train in Queens and walked home, shoulders aching. Her apartment, a 1-bedroom over a bakery, still smelled faintly of flour. She fed her neighbor's cat, reheated canned soup, then pulled out the one thing she never threw away, a spiral notebook with navy blue binding. It was filled with numbers, questions, models she'd built by hand, just to keep herself sane. She opened a blank page. Braytel acquisition. Why it fails. By 6:10 a.m., the answer was clear. The next night, she printed 3 pages from a dusty computer at a 24-hour FedEx store. It wasn't fancy. Just bullet points, ratios, and a rough breakdown of Braytel's real position. She didn't know what she planned to do with it. She just... brought it with her. Back to the building. Back to the 47th floor. At 10:55 p.m., the board was back in session. Claire, holding a tray of chilled water bottles, waited outside. Then someone opened the door. "Water?" She nodded, stepped in. They barely noticed her. That's what made what happened next so strange. As she laid the tray down on the corner table, her eyes scanned a pie chart projected across the wall. Projected growth from Braytel IP consolidation. She knew it was wrong, and something in her snapped. Before she could stop herself, her voice, calm, quiet, broke the room. If they increased revenue by 200% in 2 quarters without hiring new engineers, you don't think that's a red flag? It was so soft it almost didn't register. But someone heard. The youngest board member looked up from his laptop. "What?" Claire flushed. "Sorry, that was out of line." But the CEO sat forward, eyes narrowed. "What did you just say?" Her hands trembled. She straightened up slightly. If they're scaling that fast without staff expansion, they're either automating at a level no one's disclosed, or someone's cooking numbers. Silence. The kind of silence that says, someone just opened a door no one asked for. Then a man chuckled under his breath. Another said, "Jesus, who's the janitor reading balance sheets?" Claire stepped back. "I didn't mean to speak out. Sorry." She turned and left the room. But just before the door closed, she caught one last thing. The CEO wasn't laughing. He was watching. Some people speak to be heard. Claire had long learned to breathe through silence. It wasn't always like this. There was a time her voice filled classrooms, coffee shops, and glass conference rooms, sketching out arbitrage flows on napkins and poking holes in trillion-dollar dreams. She used to be the kind of girl professors quoted to other students. Not out of flattery, but fear. The kind of fear men feel when someone's clarity burns through their illusion. But life has its own calculus. And grief doesn't ask for permission before it rewrites the whole damn function. Her mother's stroke was sudden. Claire had been on a red-eye to San Francisco, halfway through a hedge fund recruiting trip. She missed the call the first time. Missed the second, too. The voicemail from the ER nurse started with, "You don't know me, but..." By the time she returned to Philadelphia, the hospital room smelled of bleach and endings. Her mother, Diane Bennett, the woman who once filed taxes for half of Allegheny County out of her kitchen table, could no longer remember the difference between a phone and a fork. The bills came quickly. Too quickly. The insurance didn't cover long-term neurological care. And Claire, being 23 and brilliant, but legally insignificant, couldn't make the hospital do anything they didn't want to. She withdrew from Wharton the same week she sold her car. The program director never replied to her email. Within a month, Claire had traded future value projections for discount groceries and a folding mattress on the floor of her mother's room in Queens. She tried everything. A temp job at a property data firm, night shifts, sorting mail at a fintech startup, even ran tutoring gigs on the side, until one of her students asked her point-blank, "Why are you here?" The question echoed. Why was she here? Why was someone who once solved stochastic volatility models in her head now cleaning someone else's leftovers off mahogany floors? Because hospitals don't care about GPAs. Because the landlord doesn't care about your thesis on risk premiums. Because when someone you love becomes a stranger inside their own body, nothing else matters but showing up. So she stopped explaining herself. Quiet became her currency. Claire had been working at Madison One Tower for 16 months now. No one knew that she used to trade options from a campus library window that faced Locust Walk. No one knew her hands, calloused now from pushing mop handles, once flipped through macroeconomic policy journals the way most girls flipped through fashion catalogs. And that was the point. The point was to disappear, to make it through another night, another week, another set of bills. Until last night. The moment she walked past the glass boardroom again, her chest tightened. Was she supposed to say something? Would there be consequences? The thing about surviving too long is that you begin to question any instinct that feels like courage. Still, the report sat in her bag. 3 thin pages printed in grayscale, a warning no one had asked for. Claire wiped the window with even strokes, watching the meeting unfold like a silent movie behind the glass. The young board member from before, Ben, she remembered someone calling him, was raising questions again. They've been flagged in 2 separate compliance audits. If we move now and they implode, it could tie us to the fallout. The older men leaned back in their chairs like chess masters, unmoved. One said, "Sometimes risk is the advantage." Claire almost laughed. No, she thought. That's what people say when they think someone else will clean up the mess. She turned back to her cart, grabbed a fresh cloth, and froze. The door opened behind her. "Miss?" She turned. The CEO stood there, tall, silver-haired, wearing the kind of stillness that comes from being too used to power. "I wanted to ask," he said, "what you said yesterday about the growth model." Claire's throat tightened. "I shouldn't have said anything." "No," he said. "You should have. You're the only person who has." There was no smile, just observation. He didn't invite her in. He didn't dismiss her either. Then he nodded toward the hallway. "Follow me." She didn't know where they were going until they reached the West Conference Room, smaller, empty, lit only by the city bleeding gold and red through the windows. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to her bag. She hesitated, then handed him the report. He flipped through the pages. No reaction, just silence. Then, "Did you write this?" "I did." He looked up. "Why?" She swallowed. "Because someone should have." A pause. He laid the report on the glass table like it weighed more than paper. "You ever study finance formally?" "I did, until I couldn't. And now you work nights." She didn't answer. He nodded, then handed the report back. "Tomorrow," he said, "there's an internal review on a different deal. Smaller but sensitive. You'll come. You won't speak unless asked. You'll listen." Claire stared at him. "Why me?" He didn't blink. "Because I think you see things we don't." She walked back to the janitor's closet in silence. And that night, for the first time in 16 months, she didn't take the subway home right after her shift. She sat in the empty break room, lights flickering above, and opened her notebook. Not to sketch a model, not to map another company's fraud, but to write at the top of the page, in ink that bled just slightly. Maybe silence was never safety. Maybe it was just survival. There's a kind of silence that isn't empty. It hums, it waits. Claire sat at the far end of the narrow conference room, her hands folded in her lap, the report she had rewritten overnight resting untouched in her tote bag. She had worn her cleanest pair of jeans and a plain black sweater, not because she thought they would matter, but because she didn't want to give anyone an easy excuse. Across from her, behind the floor-to-ceiling glass, the city bled gold. Wall Street pulsed below, unaware that a janitor with a pencil-sharp mind was sitting in the same room where, just last quarter, a $90 million acquisition had been signed over champagne. She had no nameplate, no chair assigned, but she was there, and that, already, was something. The internal review had begun 15 minutes ago. Claire was not introduced. No one offered her coffee. She didn't mind. She didn't need to be seen yet. They were discussing a smaller firm now, Virion Analytics, a data processing company in Texas, barely a blip on most radars, but apparently under strategic consideration. The lead on the deal, a vice president named Harold Price, was walking the room through a slide deck filled with buzzwords. And this would give us early leverage in decentralized warehousing models. There's minimal resistance to acquisition. They've posted net losses 3 years in a row. Claire's eyes drifted over the spreadsheet projected on the wall. She didn't blink. Something was wrong. The rows were too tidy, the losses too symmetrical. Engineered, her brain whispered, like someone had built a narrative out of numbers. A carefully orchestrated collapse. No one else seemed to notice, or care. A director spoke up. So we buy cheap, inject PR, rebrand as a recovery story, then flip by summer? Harold nodded. Exactly. Think of it like a rehab property, but with patents. A few chuckles. Claire's hands tightened in her lap. Still, she said nothing. Until the CFO turned. Thoughts, Alan? The CEO seated at the head of the table didn't look at Alan. He looked at Claire, and for the first time he spoke her name aloud. Claire? The air shifted. Every head turned, blinking, frowning. A pause hung in the room like a held breath. Claire sat up straighter. She hadn't planned to speak. She hadn't rehearsed. But her mind didn't need rehearsal. She pointed gently to the projected loss line. If Virion's losing money at that rate but their staff count hasn't dropped, someone is absorbing costs off books. Possibly a shadow acquisition already underway. Silence. Pure. Complete. The VP who'd just presented blinked. I'm sorry. Who? But the CEO held up a hand. Claire continued, voice calm, clear. Their patent filings have slowed, but their server acquisition rates doubled in Q2. That's not cost-cutting. That's rerouting operations. Harold turned defensive. Their CTO confirmed downsizing in April. Claire didn't flinch. The CTO who cashed out last December? Now there were murmurs. The CEO sat back, his fingers steepled. Show us. She pulled the report from her bag, passed it down the table. Not printed on corporate letterhead. No charts. No color. Just data. And truth. A board member scanned the first page, then stopped. Where did you get this analysis? I made it, from public filings, and from looking where no one else looked. Harold tried again. With respect, she's not on the team. This data hasn't been vetted. The CEO spoke quietly, but every word landed like stone. She saw what you didn't. That's vetted enough. By the time the meeting ended, Claire had said only 22 words more. No one told her what came next. No one needed to. As she gathered her bag, the young director, Ben, caught her eye and nodded once. Not with pity, not with surprise, with something else. Respect. She stepped out into the hallway, and only then did her hands begin to shake. That night, Claire returned to her closet-sized apartment, poured herself a glass of tap water, and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. She didn't cry, didn't smile either. She was thinking. Because the question that no one had asked, she had finally asked. And now? They were listening. Some rooms welcome you in silence. Others sharpen their silence into knives. Claire arrived at 9:03 a.m. sharp. The sun was barely scraping the skyline over the East River, but the 43rd floor of Madison 1 Tower was already alive with caffeine and calculation. She stepped off the elevator in her cleanest blouse and pressed slacks, the ones she had folded and refolded 5 times the night before. No mop, no cart, no gloves. But that didn't stop the looks. A woman at reception glanced at her ID badge, which still read, Claire Bennett, Facilities. An intern whispered something behind a coffee cup. Someone laughed. She kept walking. The meeting was scheduled in room H9, a mid-sized strategy suite lined with glass boards and soft leather chairs. At 9:10, the door opened, and the CEO entered without announcement. He glanced at her, a subtle nod. "You're sitting in today," he said. Just like that. No one protested, not yet. But they didn't have to. Claire took a seat in the corner, legal pad in front of her, pen steady. The others filed in, one by one. Analysts, directors, legal, risk management. Some nodded stiffly. Most didn't acknowledge her at all. The meeting began. The topic today, an upcoming investor call regarding why Kenbridge had quietly withdrawn from the Braytel acquisition. Officially, there was no strategic alignment. Unofficially, Claire knew the real reason. She had been the reason. They were rewriting the story now, smoothing the seams, burying the near disaster under layers of language. Terms like forward-looking verticals and evolving market considerations floated through the air. Midway through, a voice cut through the drone. "I just don't get it," said Travis Keene, a senior partner with the kind of jawline that booked him TV interviews. He turned directly toward Claire. "This is the same girl who wipes our coffee tables, right? Now she's writing acquisition memos?" Silence. Then a few restrained chuckles. Claire didn't flinch. She folded her hands, looked directly at him. "No. I'm the girl who saw a $300 million trap before you did." Someone choked on their coffee. The CEO said nothing. Neither did Travis. Claire turned her eyes back to the table. She hadn't raised her voice. She didn't have to. But the blowback began the moment the meeting ended. In the hallway, someone accidentally bumped her shoulder. In the elevator, 2 junior staffers entered, saw her, and stepped out. By lunch, there was a post on the internal Slack, a blurry photo of her from behind with the caption, "New head of M&A?" The thread was filled with emojis and thinly veiled jabs. She closed it, went back to work, back to thinking. That evening, as the sky turned the color of old steel, Claire returned to her usual post on the 47th floor, not to mop, but to think. The floor was empty now. No meetings, no whispering boardroom, just the scent of waxed marble and the long echo of ambition. She walked slowly to the very door where she had once spoken a single question into the air and changed everything. And then she laughed, soft, quiet, tired. Not because it was funny, but because this was the floor without a place to stand, the one where she didn't belong as a janitor, and didn't yet belong as anything else. She leaned against the glass, forehead resting on cool surface, and whispered to no one in particular, "They're not scared of what I said. They're scared I might keep talking." The email came at 8:07 a.m. Subject line, HR, confidential meeting. Today, 1:30 p.m. No greeting, no explanation, just an invitation to a windowless floor where people usually went in pairs, one to speak, one to witness. Claire stared at the screen, then, slowly, closed her locker. At 1:29 p.m., she stood outside room 5B on the 10th floor. Beige carpet. No sound but the faint tick of a wall clock that felt accusatory. Inside sat 2 people, Karen Lee, VP of Human Resources, and Alan Marks, the CEO. He looked up the moment she entered. "Take a seat, Claire." Her body obeyed before her mind caught up. Hands folded, face still, back straight. She had learned long ago that composure was her only currency. Karen began reading from a file. "Per your recent participation in internal discussions beyond your current role and classification," the words sounded like velvet wrapped around a blade. Claire felt the blood rush to her ears. So, this was it. The moment they told her she had overstepped, that she had embarrassed someone too high up, that her badge didn't unlock the kind of rooms she had entered. Karen paused, then turned a page. "We'd like you to sign a temporary non-disclosure and advisory agreement, effective immediately. You'll be invited to a series of confidential review sessions regarding active investments. This is not a promotion. It's not permanent. But it is real." Claire blinked. "I'm sorry?" Alan leaned forward. "You asked a question no one else asked, and you asked it with precision. I want to see if that was an accident or a skill." He slid a folder across the table. Inside was the NDA, a provisional badge, a schedule. Claire didn't touch it. "Why me?" she asked. "Because you look at the numbers," he said. "The way people look at lives." The next morning, Claire stood outside room 42C, the small conference room where her first internal strategy session would be held. No one greeted her. No one opened the door. She did it herself. Inside, 5 men in suits sat around a long table. No introductions, only spreadsheets. One of them, a senior risk officer, glanced up. "You're the janitor, right?" She didn't smile, didn't blink. "No," she said. "I'm the one you call when your model doesn't match the real world." They presented her with a deal. A logistics firm in Denver claiming to have developed a proprietary AI-driven delivery algorithm. Claire didn't interrupt. She waited, took notes in longhand. After 20 minutes, she finally spoke. "Line 17 of your cost breakdown. You're listing maintenance as variable, but they've had the same fleet for 3 years. Their trucks are aging out." The room shifted. She continued. "And page 5. Their contract renewal cycle is based on service-level agreements tied to weather patterns. They've stopped disclosing storm delays." "Which means?" someone asked. Claire looked up. "They're about to breach contract, and they're hiding it under silence." At 4:10 p.m., she was back on the 47th floor. Not working, just walking. She paused at the hallway window overlooking the East River. The sun was low. The glass was warm. In her tote bag, the advisory agreement sat next to a pen she never thought she'd use again. And yet, she didn't feel proud. She felt exposed. Because now they knew. And now she would have to choose, speak louder, or go back to vanishing. That night, as she exited the building, the janitor on the night shift, a boy no older than 20, passed her in the lobby. He smiled politely. "You new in admin?" She looked at him. Really looked. Then reached into her bag, handed him a folded slip of paper. "When you're ready to ask questions," she said, "don't let the uniform stop you." He looked confused, but nodded. And Claire walked into the dusk, knowing she had just given away the one thing no one had ever given her: permission. The door opened at exactly 2:00 p.m. Inside the executive boardroom, the temperature always felt 5 degrees colder than the rest of the building. Not from the air conditioning, from expectation. Claire stepped in. There were no handshakes, no introductions. Just a long glass table, 12 chairs, and 12 people who ran one of the largest private equity firms on the Eastern Seaboard. Her name was not on the agenda. She was not listed in the pre-read. She had no job title on the invite. But she had been told, by the CEO himself, that she would be speaking first. She laid the folder on the table. It was worn at the corners. The report inside had been printed at a neighborhood FedEx. No glossy charts, just logic and risk, in a font too small and margins too tight for anyone in this room to take seriously at first glance. The man to her right, someone she recognized from Forbes profiles, leaned back, arms crossed. "Who exactly is she?" he asked no one in particular. No one answered. Claire opened the folder anyway. The subject was Severin Data Systems, a West Coast firm courting investment with claims of a game-changing cloud compression technology. Claire had spent 3 nights rebuilding their financial timeline from scratch. It didn't add up. At 2:03 p.m., she said her first sentence. Severin's compression patents don't align with their cost curve. The only way their margins work is if they've been leasing IP from a third party, possibly an unregistered holding in Luxembourg. The room didn't react. She turned to slide 2. A hand went up. "You're saying they're cooking their IP?" Claire met his eyes. "I'm saying they're repackaging someone else's and calling it proprietary." Murmurs. The CFO adjusted his glasses. "That's a serious allegation." Claire nodded. "So is investing $180 million into a mirage." At 2:11, the first real hit came. Ethan Voss, an older partner in a blue 3-piece suit, tapped his fingers once and said, "Where exactly did you study again?" She paused. "Wharton. Until year 2. He smiled like he'd won something. "Ah, so not a graduate." Claire didn't answer. "And what role do you hold here now?" She let the silence stretch. "Strategic consultant. On temporary agreement." A small laugh from someone down the table. "From facilities to finance, that's quite the pivot." Claire looked down at her own report. For a second, she almost apologized, as if truth required credentials. But then she said quietly, "Numbers don't care who's holding the pen. They either hold or they don't." The CEO, who had been silent until then, finally spoke. "Gentlemen," he said, "we're not here to question her resume. We're here because the last time she spoke up, she saved us $300 million. The room froze. Then, stillness. Not agreement, not welcome, but something harder to kill. Attention. Claire spent 19 more minutes walking them through the data. No one praised her, but no one refuted her either. And in a boardroom, silence is sometimes louder than applause. That evening, she sat alone in the break room, the same one where janitors clocked in and out, where vending machines hummed and cleaning gloves dried on hooks. Her PowerPoint, borrowed from the neighbor kid's laptop, still open on the screen. A single text buzzed. It was from Ben, the young director. "They didn't say your name once in the follow-up, but they're not moving forward with Severin." Claire stared at the screen, then typed, "They don't need to know my name. They just need to know I was right." She didn't send it, just locked the phone, and smiled. Not because she had won, but because the room had heard her, even if it refused to remember who spoke. The first message came at 7:41 a.m. Just 3 words from an unknown number. "You're the janitor?" Claire stared at the screen. She didn't reply. By 8:00 a.m., there were 4 more. 2 were just emojis. One said, "Tell me you're not in the Severin deck." She knew what that meant. Somewhere between her PowerPoint and the board's silent withdrawal from the Severin deal, her presence had leaked. Not officially, not by title, just her existence. in the room. And that was enough. By mid-morning, the entire 43rd floor was buzzing. Did you hear? She used to mop the elevators. No, dude, she still does. She's some kind of math freak or something. Someone said she audited Wharton and hacked a hedge fund model. The stories grew, each more warped than the last. Claire walked past a row of analysts pretending not to look, but they did. One didn't even lower her voice. Strategic review input from facilities now? What's next? The IT guy trading currency? Claire didn't stop walking. But inside, something cracked. Not from shame. From recognition. This wasn't about numbers anymore. It was about permission. Who's allowed to speak? Who's allowed to be right? That afternoon, in a private meeting, the CEO laid it out plainly. "We're not going public with your role," he said. "Not yet." Claire nodded. "Because I make the firm look unstructured." He didn't deny it. "It's not you," he said. "It's the illusion we sell. Clean lines, clean hierarchies. We sell certainty, Claire, not wild cards." She stared out the window. New York was buzzing beneath them, like a living stock ticker. "So I stay invisible. You stay effective." She almost laughed. Almost. The next day, Claire returned to the break room on the 47th floor, not out of necessity, but out of ritual. There, leaning against the mop closet, was Elijah, the overnight janitor who'd taken over her old shift. Barely 20. Quiet, like she used to be. He looked up. "So, it's true? You're like, upstairs now?" Claire didn't answer immediately, then said, "Sort of." He smiled. "That's crazy." She smiled back, then picked up an old broom, ran her fingers along the wood. Still familiar. Still hers. "Not that crazy," she whispered. The Severin deal collapsed in silence. No press release, no explanation. Just nothing. But insiders noticed. 2 weeks later, Bloomberg reported that Severin was under quiet audit for intellectual property misrepresentation. One analyst, in a separate, unrelated call, used a phrase that made Claire choke on her coffee. "We've been watching for compression that doesn't compress. You know, a Claire flag." She didn't laugh, but Ben did when he forwarded the quote. "Congratulations," he wrote. "Your folklore." But folklore doesn't have an office. Folklore doesn't get a seat. And folklore still walks alone. Because even as her insights saved millions, even as people began forwarding her reports under the label Confidential Insights, no one offered her a title, or a raise, or a nameplate, just a newer NDA. And more silence. Still, one night as she passed the main conference room, she noticed something new. On the inside glass wall, someone had scribbled a note marker for a model in progress. "Ask the janitor." Claire stood there for a long moment, then turned, and kept walking. They asked her to speak, not behind a door, not off record, not in a meeting where her name didn't appear. This time there was a stage, an audience, a microphone. And her name, Claire Bennett, printed on the official retreat agenda of Cambridge Capital's Senior Leadership Summit. The retreat was held in the Catskills, a converted lodge wrapped in pine and ego. There were wood-beamed ceilings, catered buffets, and hand-written calligraphy on every place card. Claire didn't have a place card. She had a 20-minute slot between operational risk innovations and AI in mid-market strategy. Her topic, at least on the program, was outlier thinking in investment evaluation. but what she said had nothing to do with outliers, and everything to do with being overlooked. She stood behind the podium in a navy blouse and jeans she had ironed 4 times. No PowerPoint, no deck, just a folded piece of paper she never once looked at. "Before I begin," she said, "I want to clarify something." Her voice was calm, unshaken. "I've been called a lucky guesser, a gut-feeling janitor, a curious exception." A few polite laughs in the back. She didn't smile. "I'm not lucky." She let the words hang in the air. "I'm angry." Now the room shifted. "I'm angry that silence gets mistaken for stupidity, that credentials get confused with clarity, that someone had to clean glass for 16 months before being asked a single question about the numbers behind it." No one moved. She wasn't yelling. She was unapologetically precise. "I didn't see what others missed because I'm special. I saw it because I wasn't busy performing certainty, because I had time, because I watched, and I waited, and I asked the question no one else remembered to ask. Who cleans up after your strategy fails?" A long pause, and then, slowly, the room began to shift. One of the directors nodded. A compliance officer put down her pen, and then, like thunder rolling across the room in slow motion, applause. Not explosive, but honest. And when it ended, the CEO rose, walked to the front, and shook Claire's hand without saying a word. Because there were none. That evening, alone on the deck behind the lodge, Claire sat with a glass of sparkling water and her notebook open on her lap. She didn't write anything, just watched the pine trees sway. A woman approached, late 40s, in finance since before the .com crash. She sat beside Claire without asking. "You said something today," she began, "that reminded me of my mother." Claire turned. "She used to clean buildings in the Bronx. Said the quietest rooms often had the most unswept corners." Claire smiled, and for the first time said it out loud. "I'm not lucky. I just looked long enough at what others call dirt." The email had no subject line. Just one sentence, from Alan Marks. "You don't need an invitation anymore." That was all. No instructions, no title, no office, just a shift, small, quiet, seismic. Claire Bennett was no longer a visitor. She was now a presence. Her name started appearing in internal memos, not as advisor or external contributor, but as Claire. Just Claire. Sometimes CB, sometimes just the word loop Claire in, a kind of shorthand, a recognition that didn't need ceremony. That was the thing about respect, she realized. It arrived late and without flowers. She now worked daylight hours, reviewed acquisition pipelines before they reached the boardroom. Her desk, if it could be called that, was a standing table on the 46th floor near the window. No nameplate, no chair, just a place where deals began to pivot based on what she noticed and what she questioned. There were still whispers. "She doesn't even have a CFA." "She didn't finish Wharton." But now those whispers ended with a pause and a but. "But she caught Severin. But she reversed Braytel. But she saved us $480 million in sunk risk." The door to the 45th floor boardroom was now open to her. No security check, no clearance needed, no badge swipe. Sometimes she walked in during mid-conversation and people stopped, not because she interrupted, but because they wanted her to. They started saying things like, "Wait for Claire before we move forward. Has Claire seen this yet? What's Claire's read on the model?" And yet, on Thursday afternoon, She rode the elevator all the way back down, past the polished glass and marble, past the boardroom floors, to 47. She stepped into the hallway where her hands once scrubbed tile grout at 3 a.m. The scent of ammonia still hung faint in the air. The new janitor, Elijah, looked up from behind his cart. He blinked. "You okay?" Claire smiled. "Just visiting." He looked confused. "Upstairs. They know, right?" She nodded. "They know enough." "Is it weird, being in both places?" Claire thought for a moment. "It's only weird if you forget who you were." She took the mop from his hand just for a moment, held it, balanced the weight. Still remembered the motion, a long, smooth figure 8. She didn't stay long, just enough to sweep a small corner, to return the broom gently to its hook, to nod at Elijah and walk back to the elevator. But as she stepped in, she looked once more at the hallway and whispered to herself, "The door was never locked. I just thought I needed a key." The hallway was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that follows tension, but the kind that feels like a held breath finally exhaled. Claire walked slowly past the stretch of white tile outside the janitor's closet on the 47th floor. It was just past 6 p.m. The lights had dimmed to a soft amber. The echo of high heels and closed-door meetings had faded. And then she saw him. He was maybe 19, maybe 20. Tall, thin, a little unsure of how to push the supply cart without bumping into every corner. His gloves were too big. His lanyard still had the plastic stiffness of something freshly printed. Claire recognized the look. The way he moved quieter than necessary. The way he paused when someone important walked by. The way he made himself small. She had been him once. She approached gently. "New?" The boy looked up, startled. "Yes, ma'am. First week." Claire smiled. "You can drop the ma'am. I used to mop this hallway." His eyebrows lifted, not in disbelief, but in the kind of curiosity that had space for impossible things. "You work upstairs now?" "I do." "You an admin?" She paused, then nodded once. "In something like that." She pulled a folded slip of paper from her coat pocket. A small square, handwritten, slightly creased. She handed it to him. "What's this?" he asked. Claire looked him in the eye. "Something to hold on to. For later. Not now. Maybe one night when you're wiping down a screen and you notice a number that feels off, or hear something you can't unhear." The boy opened it. One sentence. "Don't wait to be invited." Claire turned and walked away, her heels soft against the hallway tile. She didn't look back, didn't need to. That weekend, in a quiet apartment with sun-stained windows, she opened the same notebook she had carried for years. The one she never let go of, even when she let go of almost everything else. She turned to the very first page, the one she had left blank for a long time, and wrote, "No one saw when I started. No one had to. I saw myself. That was enough." Then she closed the book. Not because it was over, but because the story no longer needed to be hidden. Some people build legacies with deals and dollars. Claire built hers in silence. In the moment she whispered truth through a glass door. In the moment she stood still when others dismissed her. In the moment she handed a folded note to a stranger who reminded her of who she used to be. No applause, no headline, no statue in the lobby. Just one person who changed a system, not by breaking in, but by noticing when the hinges were already loose.